wish that you could be a kid again? Life was so simple then. School days had scheduled nap times, homework took a maximum of 2 hours to complete, and recess was the best part of the day. As a college student looking back, I know I took it all for granted. I wish I could complete my studies in 2 hours now. As a kid though, that homework felt like torture. We are so impressionable and innocent at that age. Everything is so new and exciting. We're constantly learning about the whys and hows and absorbing the environment that surrounds us. We start to gain an understanding of actions and consequences with our own experiences. For example, there's nothing like learning the importance of making sure your shoes are tied after tripping on your own 2 feet, or learning to never touch a stove after it's just been turned off because it's still hot. Each lesson tends to stick with us because learning from our past is how we grow as people. Renowned philosopher George Santayana once wrote that those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. And this can be interpreted on a smaller scale, like learning that untied shoelaces can easily turn into a meeting with the ground below you, or on a larger scale with our nation's history. It's easy to forget about how important it is to learn about our history, and it's easy to dissociate it from who we are today. You've probably heard comments like, "It's happened decades ago," or "It's old news, leave it in the past, it has nothing to do with our life today, so move on." But what if I told you that our history actually does have a lot to do with our life today? Despite what many may think, it is threaded throughout the fabric of our daily lives. Do you know the exact moment you realized what you looked like and what that meant? Before 4th grade, I was the only black girl in my small class at a predominantly white school. As early as 1st grade is when I noticed my skin wasn't the same as my friends, and they didn't wear their hair in the same twists and barrettes as I did. I understood that I looked different from my classmates, I acknowledged it, but it didn't change anything at the time. I loved my class, and I especially loved hanging out with my friends at the after-school program. Every day after class is finished, a small bus would take my 6-year-old self and my classmates to a local after-school program. The routine was that once we got there, homework had to be done. Then we could play with our friends until our parents came. My dad would always come around 6 o'clock, and then my day would end with a nice bubble bath and an early bedtime. Nobody could have ever predicted that one of those days would end at the hospital. When my mom came home later that night and saw the hospital bill on the table, my dad had to explain to her how I was stabbed across my leg with adult scissors by a girl who was a year older than me at the after-school program. The counselor in charge left me alone with an ice pack and towel for hours because she couldn't stand the sight of blood. That alone made my dad furious, and he continued to explain to my mom that I looked like I had lost a lot of blood and needed stitches, so he headed to the ER. Instead of stitches, the residents caring for me decided that the deep 8-centimeter wound can be fixed with little surgical glue, and they sent me on my way. And it never healed properly to this day. Recalling this memory actually reminded me of an interesting study I read where 222 medical residents were surveyed in 2016. Many of these residents believe that Black or African American patients don't feel pain the same way other races do because they have less sensitive nerve endings. These residents also believe that Black patients have thicker skin and the ability to coagulate quicker. Now, I'm not claiming here that the residents that took care of me at the time shared the same beliefs, but I am a true believer that the way we think is mirrored in our actions, so when this way of thinking is put into medical practice, the devastating result is that Black patients are often undertreated. A separate study actually found that in regards to pain management, 22% of Black patients are less likely to receive pain medications compared to their white counterparts. One can deduce that those beliefs, amongst other reasons, can likely be the root of the issue. This distinct racial variation in pain perception truly reveals a portion of the racial disparities present in medical practice today. Although unintentional, the implicit bias can result in detrimental consequences if a patient continues to be undertreated. And these biases were ingrained from centuries of misconstrued discourse. The prejudice Black people don't feel pain rose from the early 18th century as a poor excuse to justify slave owners' actions towards slaves. It became a disgusting coping mechanism for the horrors they imposed. Doctors like Benjamin Moseley likely inspired the work of Thomas Hamilton, J. Marion Sims, and many others who pursued inhumane experiments on slaves to test their absurd theory that black people feel less pain. Might I add, without anesthesia because, quote, why waste it? Despite being proven wrong and wrong again, they deliberately took a blind eye to what was in front of them. The lack of physical evidence and the audible screams of agony did not stop them from sharing their so-called findings, which developed into black people feel no pain instead of less pain. With the continued support of these physicians' publications, the practice of slave owners, and endorsements from former President Thomas Jefferson himself, a triad of power and influence was born that will emerge into future horrific projects like the Tuskegee experiments, the unjust procurement and use of HeLa cells, chemical nuclear warfare testing like the Cincinnati radiation treatments. I can go on, but I'll save you that earful. So as you can see, although the survey performed in 2016 only included a few hundred medical residents, over 300 years of ingrained generational bias from myths has proven prevalence today. History has proven prevalence today. You're probably wondering who this beautiful woman is on your screen. Well, this is my late grandma Tilly, and it was my senior year of high school that I learned the news about her cancer. Not only is she here to offer me some moral support, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about her. It's a little before 7 a.m. in Haiti, and my grandma wakes up to get her 7 children ready for school before she heads out to the local high school cafeteria. As one of the cooks, she prepared meals for the nuns and students. She'd leave around 4 p.m. at the end of each school day with an extra penny in her pocket. That's right, literally a penny a day was her earning after spending the entire day on her feet for cooking for the school Mondays through Fridays, and sometimes weekends. But her day wasn't over just yet because any spare time she had would go towards selling goods to locals or even washing laundry for the neighbors at the nearby river. Anything for a little extra money. You know, my dad told me that she would often go without eating or drinking anything because she was just so focused on what she was doing. So he'd try to bring her some water while she worked. She was more worried about providing for her children rather than herself. And in the words of Donna Summer, she worked hard for that money and for her family, who grew up to lead amazing lives. This word right here, lazy, is not one that I would use to describe Grandma Tilly. I'd use strong, resilient, selfless, a fighter. She was a hard worker, and this is just one story out of millions, so when I hear individuals say black people are lazy, I can't help but be baffled by what I'm hearing. Every stereotype has its origin, but there's no single answer as to where this particular prejudice came from. Personally, though, when I do hear this stereotype, it's usually directed towards unemployed Black or African American individuals that live in low-income areas. Do you recognize this area? Well, it's our city, Philly. This is Philadelphia's residential security map created by the HOLC back in 1933 as a result of former President FDR's New Deal. You may recognize this from middle school history class when you were learning about redlining and selective lending. With white flight into the suburbs, realtors would exclusively show houses to black buyers in the red areas that were deemed hazardous. Skin color alone was enough reason for lenders to deny black families home ownership on other properties. Out of curiosity, I wanted to see what the city looks like now compared to then, because I don't know if you've experienced this before, but anytime I drive outside of West Philadelphia to a nearby suburban area, I can visually tell that I'm in another town. So this is a regular Google map of Philadelphia today. About 90 years after FDR's New Deal, subsequent white flight, and continually denying African Americans equal opportunities, this demographic is the result. There is a clear shift in the white population outside of the city and a large population of minorities within city lines. The same trend holds true when evaluating low income and unemployment rates. Looking at this, one can't help but wonder how this was able to progress so far and why throughout these 90 years change was limited. When individuals observe this phenomenon and don't understand the history that caused it, stereotypes like black people are lazy arise, which is inaccurate. Again, this demonstrates the imprint history has on our society today, but it doesn't have to be permanent. With every car ride, my dad's favorite station, NPR News, would be playing, and usually I would try to ignore it and listen to my own music. But there was one segment called The Forgotten History of How the U.S. Government Segregated America playing, where Richard Rothstein was being interviewed, and I was intrigued to turn off my headphones and hear what he had to say. Mr. Rothstein was asked about his views in Race on America after his extensive research on segregation and housing, and his response was simply hopeful. Hopeful that if we could understand the history, we might be able to address some of these problems. I wished at that moment that everyone could hear this because I realized that change would require a collective effort. I thought to myself, I'm just one person, so I brushed it off, put my headphones back in, and enjoyed the rest of the car ride. Since then, Rothstein's words have always echoed in the back of my mind. Growing up, I faced a number of trials and tribulations, many of which have gone without consequence. I became accustomed to the adversity and grew tired of the constant battles. It wasn't until freshman year, though, of college that I finally said, enough is enough. Do you remember the 2018 Super Bowl? Of course you do. The Eagles won and the city of Philadelphia was on fire, quite literally. Everybody was celebrating whether you liked football or not, and Center City was packed, and even my university had to shut down for a day. I lived in the dorms at the time, and it was almost impossible to get any sleep that night. When I woke up the next morning, glad that I was able to sleep in with classes being canceled, my friend pointed out the N-word with a hard R was written on my dorm room's whiteboard. I was furious. Not necessarily because of the label, as I've been directly called this many times before, but mainly because I couldn't comprehend the amount of hate someone must have to go out of their way to target me anonymously. This individual, or group of individuals, felt the need to find the only black girl that lived on this floor of the building and do this amidst the chaos of the Super Bowl celebrations. Therefore, finding the culprit was difficult, and yet again, another incident went without consequences, and I was done accepting that. If this couldn't be solved, I was going to prevent it from ever happening again to me or another colleague on this campus. Mr. Rothstein's words came rushing back, and I knew now that although change requires a collective effort, it only takes one person to initiate that change. From this, ACE Week was born. Knowledge is a powerful tool, and like I said earlier, the way that we think is reflected in our actions. I thought that maybe if I could create a week full of events dedicated to educating each other about our history, culture, and the importance of awareness, then maybe I could spark new perspectives to develop and help prevent any more harmful action from being committed, at least on this campus. I began my research, collecting ideas and resources from other colleges that have similar programs, gathering advice from friends and families, and gaining the support of campus faculty and staff. Eventually, ACE Week was launched in 2019. Its events included decorating the campus with flags of countries from around the world, speaker sessions discussing diversity in religion, healthcare, leadership, and more, dance performances, an art showcase, and even a banner was hung up that contained signatures from students and faculty showing their commitment to learning about and spreading cultural awareness. My goal was to make this an annual event that will grow bigger each year. Due to the pandemic, 2020's ACE Week had to be virtual, but despite the limitations, I hope it still made an impact. Dear listeners, it's so important now more than ever to acknowledge that we are still learning. Our history is a key component to how our society is structured today, so it doesn't matter if it's happened centuries, decades, or just a couple years ago. It cannot be ignored. All stereotypes and prejudices have a complex origin that's developed into influential constructs beyond the few examples I provided. As science students and future healthcare professionals, have you ever wondered why most studies or guidelines have a smaller sample of minorities, yet expect the limited data to represent all patients within that ethnic population when deciding the best treatment? There's history there. Or have you ever wondered why in 2019, Black women were 1.5 times more likely to be sent home from work because of their natural hair? There's history there. Many viewed natural hair as unkempt, and it was grounds enough to be denied entrance to work or school. Even this past year, in 2020, we have gone through a lot as a nation. Amidst the news being reported on the pandemic, there were nationwide protests against police brutality. Have you ever wondered why in 2020, despite Black or African American citizens making up only 13% of the population, that 28% of the 1,127 cases of police killings were Black citizens? Well, there's history there too. When questioning today's social constructs, the answer can usually be found by looking in the past. We still have a very long way to go as a country, but the future is bright. There's beauty in our diversity and power in our unity. If we put all our differences aside and come together to understand more about one another and become more culturally aware, we can move mountains. We all have the potential to make a difference. There's a spark within every single one of you that has the ability to start a fire or a cascade of change. I applaud you because you have already taken that first step to sparing some time out of your day to come listen to this talk. What will you do with the information you've learned about the harsh realities we face? Although I've mainly focused on one ethnic group during this speech, there are so many more areas regarding other ethnic groups, religions, and gender to unravel. If the past was able to influence and structure the way we are today, we have the tools to influence and structure a better future. We have made tremendous progress, but it is not enough. Therefore, I challenge you to look deep within yourself, find your spark, and use it. You don't have to create an ACE week, but maybe you can bring this discussion with you to the next family dinner or friend hangout. Start the conversation and keep an open mind. Let's start to embrace one another. Let's break the cycle of history repeating itself and move forward together. Thank you for listening.